Good afternoon, everybody. Let's get started in about 15 seconds, or we can stop right now, actually. Before we do get started, I just want to express our gratitude to last year's cohort for making the transition go as smoothly as it did. Very grateful to them, and we wish them the best of luck in their careers now and in their future endeavors. Also, I'd like to thank the panel for showing up today. We appreciate your attendance and look forward to your feedback, and really excited to be presenting this for you guys today. And to my colleagues, our classmates in the back, we appreciate your support being here today. We hope we make you proud. I know we're here representing you, so not only do we appreciate your presence, but we look forward to working with you guys in the next year. I think we've done, we made great progress so far, and looking forward to build on what we present today and really accomplishing some wonders. And we look forward to your feedback as well. Okay, let's get started. Another thing, actually, to get started, the first thing I do want to cover is there has been a violation of the IPS. Beginning of the new year, we were made aware that the stock had violated the IPS by it was approaching the maximum allocation rate of 5%. We were made aware of this during the holiday, and we were making progress towards achieving that rate. However, we had some technical difficulties in achieving that, but that has been done now. And in regards to maybe more detail what occurred, I'm going to let my colleague Kashi try that for you. And just if you have any questions, just please write that to him. To get started, we're going to be, this is the agenda today. I'm going to be speaking on behalf of the compliance team. We're going to go over the performance review for the year and in the past 10 years and break it down not only by region, but by market. And that in turn is going to lead us to sort of a future plan as to what we think we should do in the future and how we can improve on our current positions that we currently have. Macro, obviously, I'm the head of the macro team. My name is Claude. I was elected by my peers and very, very grateful for the position that I currently have. I'm the head of the macro team. I'm going to be starting us off after compliance, followed by Canadian equity, global equity, and fixed income actually will follow both equity classes, ESG, and then risk afterwards. To get started in the annual performance review, I'm going to give a brief overview of the SIAS asset mix, give you a brief summary of our current holdings and how many we have and the market value of each asset class, followed by sort of how far we've come in the past 10 years from a performance cumulative standpoint. Give a brief overview of that, followed by our annual performance and how we've done in the past year. And after this, we're actually going to talk really briefly, as I previously said, about each exposure to each region and how each region has done in terms of performance. And, this is mostly within the global equity class, so from emerging, developed, Asia Pacific, and Europe. All right, let's get started. So here, as you see, a brief overview of our current holdings. You can see in terms of global equity, we have 35 individual securities and holdings. And that includes, on top of that, we have 11 country ETFs. Market value of the global equity class is $7.2 million. It represents 37.7% of our total portfolio allocation. If you look at Canadian equity, Canadian fixed income, apologies, 35 holdings in total, market value of $4.6 million. In terms of Canadian equity, 37 holdings, market value of 6.5. Canadian equity, we have 34.2% allocated in our total portfolio, and we have Canadian fixed income at 24.1%. Next, we look at the allocation range throughout the years. You can see that the amount of the overweight towards, in the next slide, we're actually going to be mentioning benchmark weights in our allocation ranges, which we over and underweight. You can get a brief overview here of which ones, how it's been over the years. We haven't made any drastic changes. I think the variation is mostly due to change in value in each. In terms of the amount we've allocated to each asset class, it has stayed relatively consistent. Again, just to clarify, I think the deviations are mostly due to just the change in market value. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I talk about the future plan we have. But just keep that in mind that there's some deviation, but it's been mostly due to the change in market value. Here's a 10-year cumulative return review. As you can see here in red, we have the SIAS cumulative return, and in gray, we have the benchmark return at the bottom here. You can see that throughout the years, our over-allocation to global equity relative to Canadian equity and fixed income has paid off pretty well. Again, obviously, the actual return that you see here isn't solely due to that over-allocation, but it has worked for us in the past. And on top here, you can see that in 2009, the market value of the SIAS portfolio was listed at 9.5 billion, and now it is at 19. We did round up to give you an idea of where the value we rounded, just to get a better idea of where the fund was and where the fund is today. In the past year, however, it's been a little bit of an anomaly where the Canadian market performed better than the U.S. market in terms of return. I'm going to be presenting that in the next slide in more detail, but which is again, it's not the only reason why or Canadian equity performed better than a global equity, or it's not the sole reason as to why our portfolio underperformed the benchmark in the past year. However, we do believe that it is definitely a factor to consider. Here, what I present to you here, essentially the three benchmarks. So we have the MSCI World Index, which is our benchmark for our global equity portfolio. We have the S&P TSX Cap Composite Index, and then we have the FTSE 4 Canadian Universe Bond Index there. And you can see here, this is one of the very few times where the Canadian TSX and the Composite Index, which is our benchmark for our Canadian equity classes, outperform global equity. It's very uncommon. Unfortunately, due to us over-allocating to global equity, obviously it would have paid off for us to change that. However, like we said earlier, that range, that global allocation, the allocation asset range that we've associated with each asset class has worked for us in the past. We believe that it will work for us in the future. Later in the presentation, we're going to be talking about what we can do within each asset class to manage risk and return, and that's definitely the direction that we'll be taking in terms of the changes that we plan to make.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Clear your asset class allocation rates.
Yes.
Are they the market movements, or you
Oh,
actually had you actually made a strategy to overweight certain asset classes?
Sure. Just to clarify your question, you're wondering if our decision to overweight global equity and underweight Canadian equity is due to a decision that we made, or if it was simply due to economic movement?
Right.
Right.
Showed
Yeah, that's a good question. So, what I meant by that is our decision to overweight global equity has been a format that we followed at SIAS for a very long time. And historically, it's something that's worked really well for us.
always being overweight.
Overweight global equity, and yes, so historically that's been something that's worked really well for us. It not necessarily paying off in the past year is not enough justification for us to change it. We believe that the change that we can make is to be more within each asset class rather than change the big picture and change the allocation in that way. Does that answer your question? It does. Okay. We also have a brief summary actually here of the active return breakdown for fixed income, Canadian equity, and global equity. You can see here, Canadian equity definitely performed better than the other two asset classes in terms of active return. Excuse me. Here's a brief overview of our global. This is Canadian equity aside. This is a brief overview of our allocation per region. It gives you a little bit of an idea of where we allocate. This is actually excluding the United States as well. And gives a brief overview of the United States. Within the global equity asset class, we've allocated 63% of the portfolio to the United States, and then approximately 37% to the rest of the world. And within the rest of the world here, interestingly enough, we were quite diversified. Unfortunately, our holdings within the rest of the world haven't quite paid off in the past year, which is also something I'm going to get to a future plan that we do have and a change of direction in that circumstance. So also you have a brief overview here as to which market we over and underway. Obviously the MSCI World Index has pretty much zero exposure to emerging markets. So any exposure that we do have to emerging markets is essentially active weight, essentially. So yeah, just a brief overview. And next we're going to be looking at per region. As you see here, what I placed is we created essentially lines representing consolidated versions of our exposure to each market. So we're going to be breaking this down for the next few slides. It just gives you a little bit of an overview of how our global equity portfolio, excluding the United States, perform as opposed to the benchmark. You see here the MSCI World Index is the top line in brown. So unfortunately, none of the positions that we took in the past year outperformed the market. And again, similar to the other slide, we just have a brief overview of sort of the beginning value of our macro, essentially what we call it the global equity excluding the US. The beginning value was 2.8 million, now decreased to 2.7. SIAS 2.1%, 2.10%. My apologies, and market return obviously at 6.117. The actual return there is actually pretty bad at 8.27%. And again, this being another factor as to change the plans that we do have in the future. So let's have a closer look at the emerging markets. Can everybody hear me in the back? I haven't been speaking in the microphone. Okay. So emerging markets, compare that to the benchmark, we have those three holdings. So Invesco China Technology ETF, we have the MSCI South Korea, and then the MSCI India. And again, we have the MSCI World Index. In brown, you can actually see the line is way above the other three. The other three has actually generated a negative return. And then the bottom here, what we did is that because obviously the MSCI World Index has zero exposure to emerging markets, it's kind of hard to compare how our emerging market exposures have done. So we added the iShare MSCI Emerging Market, which is essentially could be considered our benchmark for whatever position you do take in emerging markets. And emerging markets in general haven't performed very well in the past year. However, our position didn't do very well, even in comparison to that benchmark. So if you look at the beginning value of our emerging market portfolio at the beginning of the year, it was listed at 0.33 million, ending value 0.29, fortunately, so active return of 16.57% return. So this is it was very alarming in the past year, and I've mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again. This is another part of our decision to move forward and to allocate this to a different strategy. And I'll talk about this a little bit in later slides. Looking at developed Asia Pacific, you have a list there of the 4 ETF holdings that we do have: Hong Kong, Japan, Australia, Singapore. Again, in this case, the MSCI World Index is the black line. So the only holding that we've had in developed Asia Pacific that has outperformed is Hong Kong. The other three, aside from the Australia exposure we've had, the other two have had negative return. And in the bottom, like the previous slide, you have the consolidated SIAS developed Asia Pacific exposure. And similar, we have negative return there too. Beginning value of our portfolio exposure to that market is 0.88 million, and the ending value, my apologies, I'm not sure if I said that correctly. The beginning value was 0.88 million, and the ending value was 0.85, and active return of minus 10.9. And I'll say this again, this is another reason as to why we're changing direction a little bit in the future, and I'm going to talk about that a little later. In terms of Europe, similar to the other two region exposures, we have the MSCI World Index in black, as you can see here. I guess you can't see, but I'm pointing at that screen, so right here. And the iShares Europe is the only one that has outperformed it. The other three underperformed, and you see the consolidated position here in the bottom. Active return minus 9.87. Beginning value 1.6 million. Ending value as of March 1st. That's 19, obviously, is 1.5. The next on, what we're going to do, before I get to the future plan that we do have in terms of our regional positions, I'm going to give you a brief overview of I'll give you a brief macroeconomic outlook as to where I believe the economy is heading. I'm going to present a couple simple metrics that assisted me in the decision in the direction that I think we should go. First off, I'm going to look at the U.S. equity market review. We're going to have a brief look at the leading confidence indicators, brief look at the yield curve, and then a little model that our team and I put together to evaluate sort of the per region equity valuations, and just to see which one ranked better than others. And last but not least, obviously the hypothetical scenario and solution that I've been talking about ever since I began speaking. So we're going to go through that very, very, as much detail as I think we should at this time. And last, before I move on to a different asset class, we're going to talk about just a brief vision for the future in terms of what the economy is going to be going through. So first off, the Shiller Cape ratio, cyclically adjusted price per earning, has been a good indication historically of where how over or undervalued the equity market is. So historically, whenever it does reach the level it's at now, the market has crashed. So and it's at pretty alarming levels currently. The global average usually is considered 15, currently at 29.88. It was even higher before the end of the year. And historically, as I previously stated, usually when it goes up to this level, usually there's a convergence back to a more moderate level. And of course, this metric in and of itself isn't enough to simply say that that's where the equity market in the United States is heading. Next, we have the Wilshire GDP ratio, again, highest in history. This is another metric that we've used to just to come to the conclusion that the U.S. equity market is extremely overvalued. Because historically, when it does get to a certain level, again, apologies for not using this more, a recession follows shortly afterwards. So this is another indication of how we believe how overvalued the equity market is in the United States. If I go back to my last slide, actually, you can actually compare back to the case ratio. So you can compare it here per country and per region, which is pretty interesting. You see the United States is at the bottom here, and you have the emerging markets on top, obviously. And so in terms of which equity market is the most undervalued and which ones are the most undervalued here, the United States really does stand on its own. We're going to talk more about this specific metric in the model that we'll be presenting, but just please keep this in mind where the K ratio is definitely at alarming levels currently. Back to the Wilshire GDP, again, quite alarming to where it's highest in history by quite a lot. Usually 0.8 is where the equity market is considered fairly valued, and when it gets above 1 is when people usually start to have concerns. So you see where it is currently, it's close to 1.8, which is pretty high. The only place that I was able to find that was that a higher Wilshire GDP ratio currently is India. Just a brief overview of our country there. So on top of the two metrics that I just presented that tell you, well, they don't tell you, but essentially that show signs of an equity market being overvalued. We look at leading and confidence indicators that also show signs of a potential economic slowdown. So leading indicators for the United States in black or gray, and then the same thing for Canada in red, been steadily decreasing ever since January 18. And so that's another cause for alarm. Same thing with consumer confidence indicators and business confidence. I'm going to say this similar to what I said for the other metrics. These metrics that we're presenting here is no way enough to conclude that the market in and of itself is heading in one direction. We're taking each individually, we're considering them, and going forward, we're going to keep considering other metrics that we believe are relevant to whatever our decision and where the economy is going. Again, I keep forgetting to present the slide on the left, but you have a brief idea here of the confidence leading indicators per country, and India being at the very top in terms of where the economy is going. Obviously, the top is the best, and in terms of China, it's essentially the higher the higher the composite leading indicator level is, the more confident and the more promising the future of the economy is in the next year or so. Next off, we have a quick look. I don't know if some of you have heard in the news that the yield curve officially inverted today, which is very alarming. You see that historically, in gray, you see the previous recessions, and in these circles, you see exactly where the yield curve inverts. So historically, whenever the yield curve does invert, a recession or an economic downturn does occur. In recession, actually, economic downturn is not doing it justice. You can see where the level is at now, and actually it inverted today. And what we're looking at here is the spread between the 10-year and 2-year yield curve. So again, on top of the other measure that I presented, this is another one that we can consider in our conclusion that I think that in the next year or so, when we're coming close to 2020, we believe that the probability of recession is going to increase. So in terms of the equity model that I spoke about earlier, this is something we put together. So we have regions and then certain economies that we consider important, especially to regarding our portfolio. So at the cyclically adjusted price to earning ratio, you have the PE, and you have the price per cash flow, price per book, price per sale, dividend yield, and the relative strength of 26 and 52 weeks. And we've associated specific weights to each of those metrics, and then we were able to rank which economy we believe is going to be doing a little better. And then, again, this is not. This is just to tell you how overvalued we believe an equity market is. You see the United States is quite at the bottom here. The cyclically adjusted price per, I'll just call it the CAPE ratio. The CAPE ratio is listed at 29. It's quite higher than the PE ratio associated with that country right now. In the bottom, I'm going to try to walk this through as slow as I can because I understand this is seems like a bit confusing at first, but this is something that I'll be using and when I express the future plans that we do have in terms of per region sort of future plans that we have in terms of portfolio exposure. The dividend yield are in red. Dividend yield according to this axis. Based on our model, emerging markets are supposed to have low PE levels and a high dividend yield according to the model that we built. The United States, and these, just please note that these are according to PE, and we use the CAPE ratio here. So that's why it's at certain levels. Just because we believe that cyclically adjusted would be more accurate for countries. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get that metric for our portfolio exposure, simply because these exposures are due to the securities that we own and the funds that we currently hold in our portfolio. So when you look at where the dividend yield is as opposed to the PE ratio, and then you look at how it is for emerging markets, you can kind of see the diversification benefits that a fund should have by investing in emerging markets. It doesn't give you the entire picture, but it gives you a brief overview of what the diversification benefits should be. And you look at here what the global average is. So you can see, for example, if you were to invest in emerging markets in the United States equity market, you get to more global level, which is usually, I had previously mentioned, that when the cyclically adjusted price per earning ratio hits 15 is usually when it's considered to be fairly priced. So globally, you can see that 22.7, that the equity market on a global scale, and this is adjusted for market cap, when it's to get to that metric. And based on our model, we do believe that on a global scale, equity markets are currently overvalued, and that whenever the recession does occur, which is what we do predict based on the metrics that we provided earlier, there will be a correction. However, here, if you look at our China, for example, this is our China exposure in terms of the security that we own in our portfolio. The dividend yield is extremely low, and the price per earning is high, which is the opposite of what investing in emerging markets should accomplish in terms of diversification benefits. South Korea is at a more usual level, and India, similar to China, is not essentially doing what emerging markets should be accomplishing in terms of diversification benefits. This is an example. We'll be accomplishing this for different regions that we invested in as well. But this is it's a little bit of a demonstration and a way that we're going to be deciding to approach where to invest and what ETF instrument to invest in to properly diversify per region. And this here, you can see this is the SIAS Global Equity Portfolio's dividend yield and price per earning ratio. Considering that 63% approximately is invested in the United States, this is according to the price per earning of our equity portfolio. But if you look at the comparison between the price per earning of the United States and its actually cyclically adjusted price per earning, it's quite different. So it's fair to assume that because we have 63% exposure to the United States, that this metric should be a little higher than this. It should be quite similar to the level where USA is at. We don't know that for sure, and we're working on putting that together. But based on our model, it's fair to assume that this metric should be a little higher than it is.
Sorry.
Yeah.
For the chart at the bottom chart in the middle.
This one here?
The scale is on the left.
Pardon?
The
Yeah. This is the price per earnings. I should have clarified that. That's a good question. So this is the price per earnings, and the dividend yield is on this side.
Right.
So you have the red here. Please, sorry. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
So the left part.
Yeah.
That's based on the SIAS portfolio.
Oh, yeah, sorry. You meant not the axis, you meant this here. Yeah, so this is the SIAS portfolio. So
as a holding first.
Yeah, so this, our exposure to China, excuse me, the China ETF that we hold is the technology one, the Invesco Technology ETF. And that ETF is giving us a price per earning of approximately 27 and a low dividend yield as opposed to the price per earning ratio. I know it's a little, please go ahead.
And then your
This is South Korea position. So I'm not sure if you're
buying China technology.
Oh, no, sorry. So these are the ETFs that we already have in our portfolio. So we have the China ETF technology, we have the South Korea MSCI, and then we have India. So those are the three ETFs that we have in emerging market currently. And each of those ETFs are giving us obviously exposure to those countries. And then this is the price per earning and dividend yield of each of the ETFs that we hold in that region. Does that make sense?
And then the second question
Yeah.
is for this, the
Sure, yep.
So the USA, this is referring to the table on
The
top.
table that we have, yes, correct.
So the USA P ratio according to the scale on the left is 20, between 25 and 30.
The scale on the, what scale on the left, sorry.
So if you look at the USA,
Yeah.
the P ratio, I should be referring to the left scale, the axis.
Yes, however, I mentioned this because we were able to find the cyclically adjusted price per earning. If you look here, the regular PE here is listed at 18.8, but we took the cyclically adjusted price per earning. Just for these though. And we're working on essentially adjusting these according to those metrics, but we haven't done that quite yet. And that's also why I mentioned that our SIAS Global Equity Portfolio, if you look at the price per earning metric, simply because the cyclically adjusted, the CAPE ratio is higher relative to the PE. Due to our exposure of 62% in global equity to the United States market, we believe that this is underestimating how overvalued our global equity portfolio. We just think that this will be a little higher when we adjust each of these PEs in our model to the cyclically adjust each PE. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
And just to clarify,
Yeah.
the top table RS26, that stands for?
Our relative strength. It's like a momentum metric.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Just a comment.
Yeah.
You got two scales, and they're not comparable.
Pardon?
You have two different scales, and they're not comparable.
Could you clarify, please?
So you have yield on one side and PE on the other side. If you had inverted PE to be E over P, you would have both on the same scale.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that would
Good
be
point.
a little clearer.
Yeah, definitely.
So the gap,
Could it
the
be
gap, the size of
percentage?
the gap is arbitrary based on the scales that you selected.
Right.
And that
Yeah.
might be one something to think about.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're definitely going to consider that. Kind of inverting the ratio and making it on the same scale. So, obviously, our emerging market exposure generated negative active return. We showed that earlier. And what we've done in the past, I think 7 out of 11 or 8 out of 11 of our ETFs that we currently invest in per country were created in 1996. And I believe since then, obviously, the ETF market has grown considerably, and every year the market is expected. I think the growth in assets under management is expected to be around 6.2% annually, and every year passive investing is expected to grow and especially to gain market share. The point I'm trying to make with this is that ETF, there's been a lot of innovation in terms of the ETFs that are out there, and a lot of the ETFs currently that I've looked at that have performed best are not the ones that are specifically allocated to a country. They're ones that are mostly allocated. They're strategic and are mostly invested in per region. For example, the one that I've looked at for the emerging market is the iShare Emerging Market Dividend. And if you recall, what we're trying to accomplish is to decrease our price per earning for global equity and increase our dividend yield. Because our dividend yield was below a global level, and the opposite was true for the price per earning. So here, before we get to the bottom part, you have the consolidated SIAS emerging market exposure in red. Going back to what we said before, you see how badly it performed in the past year. And if you recall, I said that because the MSCI World Index doesn't include emerging market exposure, we included the iShare MSCI Emerging Markets, which is very correlated with the position that we have now, but we still underperform the MSCI Emerging Markets. We have the MSCI World Index, and here we have the ETF that I believe would be hypothetical, where we liquidate our 3 emerging market ETFs and invest them in full in the iShares Emerging Market Dividend. Now, this is a hypothetical scenario. I'm not sure. What I'm trying to show here is that by properly choosing a strategic-based ETF way to invest in a certain region, I believe this is a more modern-day way to invest in ETFs. I think an idea of an ETF originally was to have a diversified version of that economy. In my opinion, it was a way to have. It's a way to not have to fundamental analysis aside. It's the way to invest in for whatever country you want to invest in. In these old ETFs that were created in 1996, they were supposed to represent an already diversified version of that economy. And since then, like I said before, I believe that ETFs have evolved. And I've stated that a lot of ETFs that have outperformed the older ones are ones that are based similarly to this one here. Emerging market dividends where the PE ratio is very low and the dividend yield is high. Not only that, but the expense ratio is lower and it's performed better in the past year. So if we were to look at hypothetically, so by changing the PE ratio of your emerging market exposure currently is 19.6. If we were to have liquidated those 3 positions and invested it fully in our emerging market dividend ETF, it would have brought it down to 18.05. It would have brought down an emerging market exposure dividend yield from 1.56% to 8.11. And it would have contributed 10 basis points in active return to our global equity portfolio instead of contributing negative 36 basis points. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to demonstrate this for the other 2 regions as well. In terms of iShares the Asia Pacific region, the hypothetical ETFs that we'd be investing in is the iShares Asia Pacific dividend. And because we're highly weighted in Japan, we're also going to invest in the MSCI minimum volatility Japan comparison. So 55% in the Asia Pacific dividend, and then 45% in the Japan, the minimum volatility. So in red, you have the consolidated SIAS, the current consolidated SIAS developed Asia Pacific exposure that we have for 4 ETFs. So you recall it was Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, and Japan. You see how poorly it performed in the past year. By investing in the Asia Pacific dividend and the MSCI minimum volatility Japan, our exposure comes up. It's not up to the benchmark level, but it did perform better than it did through the older ETFs that we had. Aside from that, it did bring our PE up a little bit, but the dividend yield increased as well. From 13.6 to 16.7 increase our PE, but it did increase our dividend yield from 3.3% to 5.13. It contributed 7 basis points of return instead of contributing -20. And last but not least, in terms of Europe, we did similar to Europe, where we consolidated our Europe position exposure, and this is where the return came. This is the return that it results from. And the iShare that we're considering here is the iShare minimum volatility Europe. So again, just to clarify, so the hypothetical here is that we would liquidate all 4 ETFs that we have, and we would invest all of it in the iShare Edge MSCI minimum volatility Europe. This resulted in a decrease in price per earning from 16.4 to 14.3. It increased our dividend yield from 3.6 from 4.91. And if you see it, instead of contributing -21 basis points, it contributed 127 basis points. And all these ETFs also, just to include, not only do they perform better, not only do they improve our metrics, not only do they increase our dividend yield, but the expense ratio is lower. And these are examples of ETFs that have all been created since 2010. And just to our earlier point, ETFs are growing. They're a more innovative way to create them. And I believe that taking away, having our analysts perhaps work mostly on finding ETFs of similar, that are strategic per region rather than per country, I believe that it will improve, it will improve our return going forward. And just to conclude, so in terms of the economic future, we have the Wilshire GDP, the Shiller KPE, the yield curve spread, and the leading incompetence indicators, all indicating that a recession is around the corner. And our future plan is to maintain current asset allocation ranges that we provided earlier. But we're going to plan for downturn or recession within each asset class versus via beta management, or duration management, and other ways we can do it within each asset class. The different portfolio managers are going to be speaking about that throughout the presentation. And last but not least, essentially what I've proposed to you today is more strategically investing in ETFs that we believe will deliver better results. And those ETFs, again, that we believe will deliver those better results, all have lower expense ratios. So we hope that there's a no-lose scenario there. Obviously, the metrics and the scenarios that we presented here today are not giving you the entire picture. We're going to have to follow up with compliance, follow up with risk, and make sure what the implementation of these ETFs mean in terms of from a risk perspective. But we do believe this is a vision for the future that will work, and something that our macro team and I are going to put together and leave, and then pass along and contribute to the future of SIAS. So I'm very excited about that, and then I'm going to thank you. That's it for me, and I'm going to be passing this along to Canadian Equity for the next section.
And thank you guys for, I want to thank you guys again for coming here this afternoon. So my name is David. I am the portfolio manager for Canadian Equity. This afternoon I'll be walking you guys through the overall performance of Canadian Equity relative to the benchmark. I'm going to guide you through first, looking at the overall return of the Canadian Equity portfolio, and then breaking that return down into portions to analyze where that return comes from, and also analyzing it from a individual securities perspective, and discuss the future plans of the Canadian Equity portfolio, and also the integration of ESG practices in Canadian Equity. So we had a bit of a drawdown going into December of 2018, as you can see here. However, our SIAS Canadian Equity portfolio outperformed its benchmark, the TSS Composite, by 100 bips against a modest tracking error of 210 bips. So our Canadian Equity portfolio is well diversified. So we own 10 out of the 11 sectors in Canada with a total of 36 stocks. The top 10 holdings account for about 54% of our portfolio, and our top single holdings are CN and CGI. Going forward, so within our portfolio, we overweight 5 out of the 11 sectors of within Canada, with our biggest overweight in information technology and financials, and our biggest underweights in healthcare and materials. From a return perspective, our highest active return comes from industrials as well as consumer discretionary, while our lowest returns relatively coming from communication services and healthcare. So breaking that down, our research team did a great job in selecting stocks. The stock selection contributed 151 bips of our active return, with returns coming especially from the industrial sector as well as the consumer discretionary sectors. While our asset allocation contributed negatively to our active return, minus 44 bips, mostly because of our zero holdings within the healthcare sector in Canada. So now going into to an individual stock level. So in the 12 month, we had stocks that are significantly outperformed. Mostly noted Thomson Reuters and CGI outperformed. While there are some stocks that we wish we hold, the stocks that outperformed but we underweighted. So I'm going to explain each of these stocks to you in terms of why we decided to underweight these. So from a diversification perspective, we don't want to hold stocks that are in the same line of business. We don't want to have too much weight on stocks that are in the same line of business. So CP and BMO are examples of that, where we hold CN in our portfolio. So we decided we want to further diversify ourselves into other areas. So we don't want to hold both CN and CP, and also we want to diversify ourselves in holding in terms of companies within the financial sector. We want to have more than just banks. We don't have insurance and asset management companies. So we don't want to hold 4 out of the 5 banks in Canada. So that in that sense we decided to pass on BMO. In terms of Inbridge, I'll be going over why we choose to underweight Inbridge in more detail. And Shopify and Canopy Growth is not really in line with our investment philosophy, as they have negative earnings as well as cash flow. So here's a list of transactions that we had in the 12 month end in March. We saw our positions in Chorus as well as Rogers, and we bought CGI, Choice Property REITs, ARC, and as well as GoEasy. So in the future, we believe that we should stick to our investment philosophy of selecting high quality stocks with positive earnings, and also going into kind of a value investment approach where we maintain overweight on value sectors and also increase our overweight in consumer staples, as well as maintaining a underweight in energy and material sector due to our carbon practices, which I'll be discussing in detail. Our improved selection and allocation process starts with the initial screening, where we'll have a factor model specifically designed to each industry. Using that factor model, we'll decide where all these stocks fit within our factor model. We select a couple of stocks. We go in depth into the fundamentals of the company. We look at the annual reports as well as management discussion analysis, as well as we analyze the stocks from the ESG perspective. And then finally, working with the macro team as well as the risk team in determining whether we should overweight or underweight that sector, and also how much risk does that stock add to our portfolio. And finally, by owning that stock in our portfolio, we don't just own and ignore. We own these stocks and we continue to monitor the news as well as rebalance our portfolio, and also engage in active ESG owner practices such as vote proxies. So just go a little bit further on Canopy and Shopify. They both had an unbelievable return in the past 12 months, but because of their negative earnings, we have to place them on our watch list. And once they have generated a stable cash flow as well as high quality earnings, we will then proceed to further analyze these two companies and decide whether we should hold that in our portfolio or not. Now, I'll walk you guys through sort of our ESG practice. So the ESG integration is relatively new to us, but being a signature of the UNPRI, we're obligated to incorporate ESG into the analysis of our stock selection process. So so I'll be going over what we're currently doing in terms of analyzing ESG from a Canadian equity perspective, and also give you an example of Trans-Canada Pipeline versus Enbridge, which that goes back to why we choose to underweight Enbridge. And also we'll look at it from a compensation analysis and also discuss some of the future plans of our ESG practices. So currently, what we're doing from an ESG analysis perspective is we're analyzing company ESGs using the SIAS material analysis map shown at the bottom here. With the SIAS material analysis map, once you click on each of these sectors, it will expand to tell you which of the factors that are most important to that specific subgroup of companies within the sectors. And you can then analyze the company using looking at their sustainability reports and looking at Bloomberg analysis to see whether these companies have good ESG practices and whether we should, from an ESG perspective, whether we should buy or sell this company. And also, once we own this company, like I said before, we'll engage in proxy voting and also being active ESG owners. We should work with other asset managers. So now we're working with the Bean Fund, which is a fund run by the undergraduates of SMU, to develop a more comprehensive proxy voting guidelines and better vote our proxies in the future. So this is an example of a executive compensation analyzer. As you can see by the red, is the compensation paid to Trans-Canada Pipeline. And Trans-Canada Pipeline's executive compensation is actually significantly lower, as you can see here, as compared to the Enbridge, how much the Enbridge executive receives. Trans-Canada Pipeline's executive compensation is actually also lower than its peers average. So from that kind of perspective, we still own Enbridge because we believe in the company, but we decided to underweight Enbridge and overweight Trans-Canada Pipeline. And also, we believe that we should do a better job in terms of having less carbon-intensive portfolios. And therefore, we decided to use the carbon footprint analyzer to analyze our portfolio against the benchmark. So as you can see here, the SIAS Canadian equity portfolio is relatively less carbon intensive than its benchmark. And going forward, we'll better train our ESG analysts to analyze these sectors just within the Canadian equity portfolio. Once we get a better understanding of how to better integrate ESG analysis into that portfolio, we'll then move on, we'll then take that strategy and replicate that in both the US equity as well as fixed income, and we'll better train next year's cohorts to analyze emerging ETFs, to analyze emerging ETFs from an ESG perspective. And also, like I said before, we'll be working with the Beam Fund to develop a more comprehensive, more harmonized guideline to better board our proxies going forward. Now I'll pass on to the Global Equity Manager, Kashi, to talk about the performance of Global Equity.
Hello everyone, my name is Kashi, and thank you for coming today. So I'm the Global Equity Portfolio Manager, but for the purpose of this presentation, I will overview the US equity holding that we have. So this is the agenda for today. I'll go over the performance that we had over the last 12 months, and then I'll talk about sector allocation and the attribution, and then I'll break down our active return where it comes from, either the selection effect, allocation effect, and I'll talk about our future plan going forward, and also I'll show you some of the transactions that we've done over the last 12 months. So as you can see, the red line represents our SIAS US equity, and the black line represents our benchmark, which is MSCI World, excluding the rest of the world global equity. As you can see, we performed the line with the benchmark over the last 12 months, and we had 10 weeks of active return with 300 basis points of tracking error. What we learned about our portfolio is that during the greatest time of the volatility, we had a positive active return, almost 200 pips in January. So this shows that our position is a defensive position that we hold, and I'll go over that in the future plan as well. So now, what do we invest in terms of investment? Our top 10 holdings consist of 62% of our holding, and we have 35 investment, 31 single security, and 4 ETFs. We have ETFs in utilities, in energy, in financial, and in real estate. As you can see, 50% of our holding is made of consumer discretionary, communication services, and information technology. Now, in terms of comparing it to the benchmark rates, as you can see, our top 2 overweights are consumer discretionary and communication services, which they pay consumer discretionary paid off by 70 basis points of active return to the active return, and the communication return contribution was negative. And our 2 most underweighted are healthcare and information technology, which information technology contributed the most out of all of the sectors that we had. And also our healthcare contributed negatively. Now I'll break down each individual one so you know where the active return is coming. So as I mentioned, our active return is 0.09, almost 0.1%. And the selection, our analysts did a fabulous job of selecting the stocks, and we had 178 pips to the active return. As you can see down here, information technology and healthcare contributed the most in selecting the stocks. In information technology, we hold Cisco and Visa, and in healthcare, we two of the best securities in healthcare, Amgen and Varian. The only thing that dragged us down is the industrial selection, which contributed negative 129 pips to our selection. Now, going forward, the allocation contributed negative 13 pips to our active return. And the breakdown of financials and materials, which actually we don't hold anything, contributed positively to our allocation. And again, healthcare allocation was negative 43 pips to the allocation. Also, if you add the selection, allocation, and traction, we don't get the same number as 0.10 pips. The reason is that we had an interaction which we cannot explain whether the active return is whether from allocation or selection.
Sorry, what attribution calculation model you use?
We are using Bloomberg's, like the US equity fundamental model.
Do you understand how they do the calculation? The first time I saw the big residuals in the introduction.
Yes.
Now maybe have in selection and allocation.
Yes, we do have interaction. Actually, all of the funds that have interaction, but for us is the bigger one.
we don't know how to explain whether the active return is coming from allocation or selection. And I don't know about the specifically about how they actually calculate the inflation.
This is in Canadian dollars or US dollars?
This is in US dollars. Everything is in US. And for future plan, as the macro team stated, we have concerns about US market going to recession and being overvalued. So what we are trying to do is we have two objectives. First, we are considering to go with more defensive sectors, considering healthcare and securities, which we are underrated, as I showed earlier. And the second thing is that we are trying to reduce our position in the US and reduce the sensitivity, the overall sensitivity to the market. This is some of the stocks that we put in watch list, and I received it from my analysts. We are specifically looking at United Healthcare and Anthem, which are in healthcare sector. This is the transaction, the list of transactions we've done. In this quarter, we sold Cisco, Visa, we purchased an ETF, S&P 500 ETF, SPDR, and also we sold the GE, which performed really bad. They sold it last year. And thank you. And I'll pass on to fixed income.
Thank you, Masha. And I'm from Flora. I'm going to talk about these are the presentation just place presentation. First, I'm going to talk about just fixed income performance, then our dollar rates and the active return distribution, then how that active return attributed by yield curve change, time effect, and then we're going to do the duration analysis and the foundation that we have. Finally, we're going to talk about future strategy. First of all, SIAS fixed income has outperformed its benchmark between 1 week. The benchmark was Canadian FTSE TMX, Canadian Gold Index Bond, and our tracking error was relatively modest at 0.4, and the information we show is around 0.5. As we can see that our dollar weight has historically been overweighted on corporate. And the benchmark has always been underweighted in corporate, and it has paid off to some extent in this quarter and the quarter before that. But because of recessionary concerns, in the future we have a plan to reduce this existing overweight in corporate and going overweight to federal and provincial like the benchmark. So this is our active return contribution. We can see we had 21 bps of active return. Negative 3 bps of active return were contributed from yield curve change. The highest was contributed from the spread change, and the time return also contributed 8 bps. The poor performance came from the selection of the specific bonds that we have selected during these years. Now the yield curve movement has contributed a negative return of 3 bps. As we can see, I have put from the last presentation that we had on October 18 and till now, the yield curve has shifted downwards mostly in the short-term band, and because of that, as we had underweight over here in the short-term, overweighted the short-term band, we gained a little bit, but as we had significant underweight in long-term, even though the yield curve went down, we lost a little bit compared to the benchmark. And the spread change has contributed to about 38 bps. As we can see, the spread went up more in the long-term part, but the spread went down in the short-term part. The left side you can see from the corporate, people have bought G spread because in the short-term end, the spread went down, and we had an overweight in the short term. We had a positive return compared to the benchmark for corporate bonds. And as the spread went up in the long term and we underweighted in corporate in terms of duration in the long term, we had lost less compared to the benchmark. And in provincial, as we can see that the spread also went up and we had underweight in the medium term, and because of that we have gained a little bit. This is a timing effect, the curve and spread carry of which contributed around 0.8 during this time period. And as we can see in the duration, our current duration is 6.9 compared to the benchmark's duration of 7.54, and we have negative 0.64 in duration. As we can see from last year at this moment, the corporate duration has been stable because of some transactions in the corporate part, and the long-term exposure in the federal, as we have bought two substantial amount of Canadian long-term bond, federal bond, that's why our duration has increased, and the provincial, because 4 of the provincial bonds have maturities in these coming 2 years, and the duration has decreased a little bit. This is our transaction so far. This bottom 2 that we have done in during this quarter because of government of Manitoba's consistent underperformance, and they are reducing debt to GDP ratio. And this is a Canadian utilities bond which were underpriced according to analyst estimate at that time. Going forward, we think the yield curve will be stable or steepen a little bit, and the spread will narrow compared to now. And also, as our duration is currently stands around at negative 0.7, and we have an IPS bound of positive and negative -1, we think that we are going to bet on long duration so that we will have at least duration neutral strategy or a little bit of higher duration. And as the macro team has already proposed, there is some recessionary concern. We'll go more defensive by overweighting long-term government and provincial, and underweighting we have one bond in consumer capital. We're going to sell that, which is the Florida 2033, and we're going to underweight some medium-term notes to balance the duration as well. And also for liquidity concerns in corporate segment, we're going to buy some bond ETFs, which we have a provision of 5% according to the IPS, and we're going to buy some bond ETFs during the next year. Now I'm going to give the floor to the risk analyst, Vivek.
Very good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vivek, and I'm the risk analyst of the global equity portfolio. Before I begin, I'd like to say that this team has been newly incorporated in December 2018. So we're now at the inception stage, and we have as of right now, we completely rely on the Bloomberg model to show our risk exposure of the whole portfolio. I will start with explaining the volatility of the portfolio and its sources and the contributors. And we also did a small scenario analysis on the basis of which we have incorporated a future plan for hedging against the risk that the portfolio currently faces. The volatility of the portfolio is expected to be about 7.49 during the next 1 year based on the current selection, attribution, and style that is used. However, the active risk is 1.28, which is good. 72% of it comes from equities, 19% of it comes from currencies, and 9% comes from the fixed income portfolio. So this shows that most of the risk exposure is due to the global equity portfolio, because that not only has the exposure to the equity market, but it also has exposure to currencies. As far as investment in the industry is concerned, overall the whole portfolio is overweight in consumer discretionary and technology. So both of them together contribute about 55% of the risk exposure, the industry risk exposure. And being underweight in healthcare contributes about 22.35%. As far as style is concerned, the whole portfolio has laid an emphasis on profit and size, because we invest in large cap companies and want to make sure that they grow. These two factors contribute to most of the risk that is exposed, that the portfolio is exposed to. Finally, these are the top risk contributors. Restaurant brands international contributes to about 6% of the return, but its risk is almost 13%. And investing in Shopify and I'm sorry to say, the lowest contributors are Shopify and Backboard Corporation. However, their returns are pretty close to restaurant brands in international and Cisco systems that together contribute about 7% of the returns. Finally, in our scenario analysis, let's start with the global equity portfolio. If equities go up 10%, we will lose about 1.54% in information technology because we are underweight in information technology in the global equity portfolio, and gain in communications by 0.32%. So there will be the vice versa effect if equities go down by 10%. When it comes to Canadian equity, if equities go up 10%, we'll lose in healthcare by 0.60% and gain in financials by 0.36%, and that's the vice versa effect if equities go down by 10%. Finally, in fixed income, it's a little different. If there's a parallel shift of 1% in the treasury yield curve, we'll lose 13% in T-bonds and 10% decrease in Berkshire Hathaway, British Columbia, and LCN bonds. However, if the yield curve shifts down by 1%, T-bonds we'll gain 16% in T-bonds. However, it will be the vice versa effect on the British Columbia. Like how much you decrease with a parallel shift of 1% up will be the same decrease for the other three bonds. However, there's one exception, which is the CAN 30-year bond, the Canadian 30-year bond. So finally, our future plan is to optimize the portfolio. We'll start with using Bloomberg's optimizer and eventually make our own by working, proactively working with the macro and the compliance team. And we'll report the risk exposure every month. We'll also report the risk exposure before and after any proposed trades. And finally, for our own knowledge, we will do some virtual hedging. This is not something that we're going to do for the portfolio. We just do for our own knowledge, because where we see potential to virtually hedge is against currency risk. And if that sort of gives a lower risk measure, suppose we can reduce the risk by simulating a virtual hedge, we will sort of suggest an alternative strategy which will be allowed by SIAS to probably reduce the risk exposure to somewhere close to the one that we get by virtual hedging. So finally, this is I'm concluding the presentation. So what kind of questions you may have for this?
Yeah, we'll just stand. Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, so thanks for the presentation, it was very interesting.
Yeah, thanks for coming, appreciate it.
So the question is for David.
Okay.
You mentioned using a factor model to select stocks in the Canadian equity market. And you made a comment about BMO being underweight. So I guess my question is, did the model select BMO, but you guys made a discretionary decision to exclude it to avoid concentration, or the model did not select BMO and it just so happened to be designed this way?
So good questions, thank you. So the model actually didn't select BMO, and plus we didn't want to. So we own Bank of Nova Scotia. We also own RBC as well as TD. And we think that we shouldn't own more than 3 out of the 5 banks, because the IPS has a constraint where we can't hold the 15-70 rule, where we can't have our top 15 positions make up more than 70% of our portfolio, right? So we don't want to have financials is divided into banks, insurance companies, and asset management companies, and we don't want to have banks make up most of our financials portfolio. We want to also invest in insurance companies as well as asset management companies, like insurance companies like Sun Life, Manulife, as well as Brookfield asset management companies like that. So that's why we decided to just own 3 banks, and also our model didn't pick. So our model actually picked CIBC as one of the really good performer. So that's why our CIBC is on our boxes.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
model said ICIPC, or did it put it on your watch list?
So the model said put it on the watch list.
Okay.
So as you can see here, oh, sure, thank you so much. So here, that's where the model comes in, right? So in the initial screen is to have the model tell us which companies we should look further into, and then we take a deeper dive into kind of understanding the company's fundamentals, understanding whether their business is suffers from maybe cyclicality or other business-related risk, and that goes into that slot selection part, and then finally we work with the risk team and then decide whether to own that stock or how much that stock gives us in terms of risk, contribution to risk to our portfolio, and then finally we then make the trade and buy the stock.
Here in Canada, the banks are very dear to our hearts, but they're also all very different.
Yes.
So the decision to own 3 versus 5 is a very big decision as it impacts relative performance. Most of the banks have exposure to the wealth management, some have foreign exposures. Some are more levered to domestic mortgage markets. There's different factors that influence each of the banks quite dramatically. So how do you size the different positions that you have in each of the 3 banks that you chose that you own?
So I guess that comes to the answer. The short answer is diversification. Right? So we want to cover all areas of business. Right? We don't want to own just a bank that does in one area of business, or is strong in one area of business, not in other areas of business. So RBC is one of the examples. RBC has great great wealth management team, and they've also engaged in indigenous wealth management as well, right? So they have their own sub-branch that has indigenous wealth management, and so we want to have, so in terms of selecting those 3 banks, we want to have banks that cover more areas of business, but also leave room to have other business put in our portfolio, like the asset management companies and the insurance companies.
Maybe part of that question is, look like you're weighting well around 6%. Why would you pick a number like that?
That's a great question. So the two stars in our portfolio, especially TD, I think we own relatively same.
I think this is 5.9.
5.9, so we've rounded up to 6%, versus about 6% in the benchmark. I think that's one of the things that we've done not so well in terms of allocation. I think that going forward we have to do a better job in terms of, if we decide to underweight banks, we have to underweight a significant position or overweight a significant position to really capture that contribution to return moving forward. Sure.
So my question's for Claude. So, well, first of all, everybody, thank you for a very good presentation. Question for Claude. You've made a very good case, or you've explained quite well why you would like to move a little bit from growth to value, and I understand why, late in the cycle and yada yada. However, I'm curious how this would or could factor into your asset allocation decision at the top of the house. I see a higher than benchmark allocation to equities and a lower than benchmark allocation to fixed income. In an environment where you expect a recession, I'd like you to tell me a little more about how you make that choice.
Right. So in terms of the big picture of asset allocation, I think we're going to stay away from decreasing allocation to fixed income. To global equity and Canadian equity, and to allocate that to fixed income. Aside from what we're going to do instead, as I stated before, is to decrease risk within each asset class. So I think there are ways for us to decrease risk and prepare ourselves for a recession that do not involve shifting active weights in terms of asset class, especially considering that the current asset allocation ranges that we do hold in SIAS have worked very well historically. I also stated earlier that the global equity index and the CI of the world usually outperforms the S&P TSX composite. This year has been a little bit of an anomaly, so at face value, it does seem like, you guys need to make some changes, and especially considering the recession that we're expecting. But just a quick example as to Canadian equity or excuse me, global equity, I know Cashy and I have been working, trying to figure out, how to perhaps move from cyclical industries, more towards the other end of the spectrum. And it's going to be certain things like that that we consider to prepare ourselves. But again, would you like to maybe?
Yeah, so to answer your question, since this fund is a long-term perspective fund, we do not change the asset classes just because we think that we are going to recession. As Claude mentioned, we are trying to go more defensive in our portfolio. For example, in my portfolio and in David's portfolio, both healthcare is the lowest in terms of asset allocation. As you can see, healthcare for Canadian and healthcare for my global equity is underweighted. So we are planning to overweight healthcare during our stay, and also underweight some of the, for example, consumer discretionary. We are trying to underweight it and make the portfolio ready for the upcoming recession. We're basically reducing our sensitivity to market. Does that answer your question?
I might have another one later, but this one is very well answered, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I want to follow on with that one as well. So you have overweight to global equities,
Yes.
but you're expecting a recession. In the risk analysis on page 34, you quantified the profit and loss on a relative basis of various asset classes, given a couple of different scenarios. So equities up 10%, lost 53 basis points, equities down 10%, gain 53. Have you quantified that at the portfolio level?
For the whole consolidated portfolio?
Yeah, because you're overweight equities, so if equities go down 10%, you're overweight equities.
Yeah.
So you're gonna gain 53 basis points by security selection, but how much are you gonna lose by asset allocation?
I think risk team, maybe it was this one was on